Okay. We have our colleague King Angel that had the presentation and in a round table, clinical trials and patient involvement. Okay, enjoy.
I'm not sure if I'm ready to begin.
Yes, Kim, go ahead.
Yes, okay. Greetings, everyone. It's an honor to be here with you today, and I'd like to extend our warm greetings from our MPS and related LSD community in Canada. I'm here to introduce and moderate the clinical trials and patient involvement, our first family session at the International MPS Symposium. Our first speaker today will be Dr. Mauricio Scarpa. His presentation will be on the European Reference Networks. Dr. Scarpa is regional coordinating with the Regional Coordinating Center for Rare Diseases at University Hospital in Udine, Italy, and also the coordinator of the METAB-ERN. Dr. Scarpa is a metabolic pediatrician with a postdoctoral fellowship in molecular at the EMBL in Heidelberg, Germany, and genetics at Baylor College in Houston, Texas, USA. He has extensive expertise as the basic scientist in genetics and biotechnology, as well as a clinician in the screening, diagnosis, and treatment for rare disorders, and leading clinical trials for orphan diseases. He's the coordinator of the European Reference Network for Hereditary Metabolic Diseases, ERN, formed by 78 healthcare providers in 23 EU countries, and treats approximately 60,000 patients with metabolic diseases. Following Dr. Scarpa is Dr. Mark Martinel, and his presentation is on the development of laraglitazone for the treatment of orphan CNS diseases. Mark is the co-founder and CEO of Minorix Therapeutics, a clinical stage biotech company from Barcelona, focused on the development of new drugs for rare CNS diseases. Prior to founding Minorix, Mark gained broad experience in drug discovery at Cristax Pharmaceuticals and Horizon Genomics, where he actively contributed to the identification of the first in-class inhibitors for the epigenetic target LSD1, currently in clinical studies for oncology and neurodegenerative diseases. Mark obtained a PhD in chemistry from the University of Barcelona and co-authored several patents and publications. Following Mark will be Dr. Maria Escolar, presenting on the long-term outcomes of MPS II patients after hematopoietic stem cell transplantation. Dr. Maria Escolar is a professor of pediatrics at the University of Pittsburgh and the founder and director of the NDRD and the UPMC Children's Hospital. At the UPMC Children's Hospital. Dr. Escolar is a tenured professor of pediatrics and neurodevelopment disabilities pediatrician at the University of Pittsburgh. She began her research on rare neurodegenerative disorders in 2000 when she established the program for the study of neurodevelopment in rare disorders, acronym NDRD. Dr. Escolar is best known for her work focused on two groups of genetic neurodegenerative diseases, leukodystrophies and mucopolysaccharidosis, MPS disorders. Since the creation of the NDRD, Dr. Escolar has published over 80 original research papers in peer-reviewed journals. And then following Dr. Escolar will be Michaela Weigel, her presentation on making yourself heard. Michaela is the president of the Austrian MPS Society. She's a teacher by profession and a mother of 5 children. After Michaela's daughter was diagnosed with MPS in 1996, she passionately volunteered for the Austrian MPS Society for more than 10 years and has fearlessly been led and been the president of the society since 1999. Michaela has tirelessly led MPS Austria to a recognized successful patient organization that lovingly supports and cares for affected families. The Society offers numerous events every year, including conferences, training courses for therapists, timeouts for parents and siblings, adult patient meetings, adventure days, and therapy week as their highlight of the year. Michaela was also the very deserving recipient of the International MPS Network Life for MPS Award in 2012. So after these introductions, I will ask Dr. Scarpa to please begin his presentation.
Thank you very much, Kim, and I hope that you hear me properly. And thank you to all the people that are participating. I mean, unfortunately, even this year, we have to be on the web, and it is really a pity, and we hope that this will start very soon to change. Because it would be very important to have face-to-face meeting and to meet and to discuss personally in order really to share all discussions and all expertise, especially in these kind of meetings. And I congratulate Jordi to having been able to set up this meeting, which could be really a major effort, I think, to run in this way. So I think it's already a big achievement. So what we're speaking today is about the European Reference Network, something that probably you might or might not have heard first. Just to tell you what the European Reference Network is, I think that it's a revolution of the modern medicine, as Vytenis Andriukaitis, who was the former Commissioner for Health in Europe, stated. After he was one of the promoter or the promoter of the entire structure of the European Reference Network, which you will see is quite successful in this period. Just to tell what this program of the European Commission is, it's the concretization of an activity that patients organization that the patient organization started at there is an interference. That the patient organization started in 2002. Michaela, can you shut down your microphone? Thank you. So it's the concretization of a movement that started in 2002 when patients affected by rare diseases went to the European Commission to say that rare disease patients are not patients of B class. And indeed, this was extremely important because it started a pathway of different legislation, and especially one directive, which is the cross-border directive of 2011, where all the patients in Europe can go from one country to the other if they don't have proper treatment or proper procedures or diagnosis. And in this directive, there is an article specifically stating the construction of the European Reference Network as networks collecting all the centers of excellence in Europe working on the same topic of interest. In 2014, there was the commission of that decided to launch the European Reference Network, and in 2017, there was the creation of these big networks. The network is actually a network patient-centered. They are constructed because I have some problems with there are some the European Reference Network are patient-centered and respond to the patient need. They are constructed to move efficiently the research and the innovation to the patient. They have been constructed to implement research and innovation from the bed to the bedside of the patient. And they have to integrate all the European program and national initiative in order that there is a sort of harmonization in Europe, and especially they are using research infrastructure and registries. And for this reason, the European Reference Network are bridging among themselves in order to work really as a whole network in Europe. We had at the very beginning the division of all the rare diseases, the over 6,000, 7,000 diseases in 21 chapters. And as you see here, there is the hereditary metabolic disorder where the lysosomal and MPSs are. The structure of the European Reference Network is something that I designed like this, where there are indeed the physician and the clinician working together and moving around all the stakeholders that are needed for a better treatment or a better quality of life for the patient. So we have connection of hospitals, but the connection of research institute, connection of public health agencies and authorities, and also sensibilization of payers for potentially problems in therapy. After this theory, we have in practice the presence in Europe of 24 different European reference network, of which is the MetaBRN, the metabolic one, which are really working for each kind of system affected by rare diseases. So we don't have a reference network for cell disorders, but rather for organs and apparatus. So we have the European reference network for the skeleton, for the epilepsy, for the neurological, for the lung problems, everything. And this is a very important thing, because since we are communicating among ourselves, our patients now do not have only the metabolic physician, but they can really make quite a lot of advantage by the interaction of all the other ERNs that are actually connecting all the expert hospitals in Europe. And for this reason, the European reference network are not told as a single network, but as a unique network grouping 300 excellent hospitals with more than 900 healthcare units from 26 countries. In the last year, before COVID, we had the second call, and now all the countries in Europe, the 27 countries, are part of the network. And here we have more than 1,000 European expert hospital units working in 350 hospitals. The centers, the patients are indeed at the center, because we have 50 organizations working with the MetaBRN, and they are actively working with us, as you will see in the next slides. But the major role is to advise what we have to do, because we need to answer to the patient need, to ensure that actually we will be able to do, to monitor how we will do, and to evaluate what we are doing. So we are really treasuring the activity and the advices of the patient organizations. The MetaBRN is a big elephant. It is spread, as you see here, in now 23 countries. It is grouped in 78 hospitals. And I am the coordinator of this MetaBRN. We have at the beginning divided the entire metabolic fields of the over 1,400 diseases in 7 subnetworks, each of which actually could work as a single subnetwork, but they are connected by parallel activities and transfer activity that you will see. The coordinators of the different subnetworks for lysosomal, for peroxisomal, for amino acids, for neuromarkers, for neurological disorders or mitochondrial disorder are grouped in the medical executive committee, with which me is ruling the entire activity of the ERNs. This year, we are expecting to have another 24 hospitals that will be part of the MetaBRN. And for this reason, we will finish and we will be present in all the 27 European countries. You see that UK is still here, because after Brexit, for us, nothing changed. And we are still interacting scientifically with the English colleagues, although they will suffer from the non-possibility anymore to have a European grants. But scientifically speaking, we are all connected still. One important thing of the activity of the MetaBRN has been particularly in the COVID era. This is the website that I invite you to go to see, because I mean, what I say today is just the scrap of the iceberg of everything that we do. But the collaboration of the networking was extremely important, because we were able to collect a lot of recommendation, a lot of national and international recommendation, a lot of infographics regarding how to treat with COVID, information regarding COVID vaccination, and also information about the local expert that could be asked for a better advice. This was extremely important because it protected quite a lot our patient. This is a diagram about all the activities that we do, from prevention, screening, diagnosis. We try to better have facilitate the diagnosis, to have a better follow-up. We have, I will show you, an education and training program in order not to lose expertise, because we are all aging, and what we need to ensure is the expertise of Europe on rare diseases. And in particular, we have a work package about patient empowerment, where all the 50 associations are coordinated by 4 associations in order to start programs to answer the patient needs. We are connected through a European platform, which is the CPMS, the Clinical Patient Management System, where all the physicians can share the data in a safe GDPR compliant way of any kind from patients in order to understand which kind of procedure or better diagnosis or therapy our patient can have. So if someone of us have some problem, we can help sharing the real material in a protected environment. Inside the MetaBRN are working about 3,000 professionals of all the multidisciplinary specialties needed to treat our patients. About projects, I have to say we're very proud to say that we have published quite a lot of papers of important interest about research and access to treatment on orphan products. And indeed, this was the first time that a network so vast like us made a survey and a result of research in metabolic and how the different drugs approved for metabolic diseases are used in Europe. We have just published a very important paper regarding the transition program in Europe, and this is something that indeed is a major milestone, because I mean we have also indicated how we could do a European program for the transition in metabolic diseases. We have just published a paper from the patients, because this has been a patient-driven paper on the social assistance needs. We had about 1,000 answers from 12 countries interacting with physicians in order to highlight which is the social and the medical need for the patient. And you will hear during this meeting more from Dr. Lampe about this important paper. We have published a couple of papers about the impact of the COVID-19 and the metabolic physician, and we proudly saw that just working in the network, the incidence of lethality in the COVID and the patient with metabolics was extremely lower than any other disease. And the importance of the network is indeed to protect and to advise properly the patient even in this pandemic. And also this has been published as a whole network. And of course, if you want to go in PubMed and just write my name, you will find all of them, and will be very interesting also for you. And another important thing is that we are running some projects to start natural histories of different disorders, especially disorders that do not have research in order to elicit research on untreated diseases. We have a registry, which is the Unified Inherited Metabolic Disorder, run by the University of Heidelberg, that is collecting, at the moment, since we just started, more than 2,000 patients. And this registry is done for natural clinical histories from clinical trials, for newborn screening, for any kind of activities that is important to collect data. And it is extremely important now for the artificial intelligence programs that we are developing. We have also an activity about mapping of metabolites and nosology and ontology and codification of diseases. And together with the ERNDIM and the Orphanet, we are collaborating to collect all the most information that is important for that. Regarding the classification, we collaborated to reclassify the metabolic disorders together with Sodubre and Ferreira. And there is now a very nice activity about that, and we have an important program about newborn screening, because you know that the future of these diseases is indeed to detect them at birth before having symptoms. These are all the people driven by Trine Tingeras from Norway working on this group of activities. We are participating to a lot of European programs, and here, and also with a lot of associations. We are endorsed by the SSIM. And we were one of the beneficiaries in the program RARE 2030 that has been granted to us by the European Commission to highlight where we have to go for the rare diseases in 2030. So we have now a roadmap that the Commission has in order to draft the future step for the rare disease patients and medics up to 2030. We are very much involved in innovative medicine, and we have different programs driven by the European Commission, from the Self Telecom for e-learning, emergency protocols, and artificial intelligence, machine learning, and natural language processing, in order really to analyze big data that the different hospitals are generating, in order to describe patient at risk and having in this way an earlier diagnosis. Of course, this is extremely important, but what we have done is a lot of publication also about this topic. For the patients, we have done in the website a map with all the activities in different hospitals, with diagnosis, the treatment, so everybody can go there and tell exactly and understand exactly what everybody of us can do. We have a big program for for education, because I mean, what we want to do is to, and I have just a couple of few slides. We are starting to launch a program for education at basic and advanced level, in order to prepare new physicians on metabolic disorders. So we have drafted a series of courses that will be certified by the MetaBRN, at the end of which the participant will receive a certification of training in metabolics. We are in collaboration with all of this program, and we are participating with the ERICA project, which is a unifying project of all the RN for the research. And one major activity is also the production of guidelines. And indeed, inside the MetaBRN, we were able to produce a lot of guidelines of missing diseases. So this is also something that we are doing to help Europe to treat the patients in a very harmonized way. The future is actually digital. So what we are doing here, since this is not a project, but it is a program for the European Commission, we have already worked for 5 years, and now we are writing the 5-year program of the next period from 2022 to 2027. And one of the major, or probably the major activity we have, will be the analysis of all the data we are generating. And what we want to do is to create innovation, to create a brand that is recognizable, like the MetaBRN brand, that need to be recognized for all the activity in metabolics, and also marketing, but not marketing in the economical way, but a way to attract interest on the metabolic rare, inherited metabolic rare diseases from companies, from associations, from institutions. And this is what we will do, more or less, to analyze all the data in order to use this data for clinical research and clinical research, in order to create digital biomarkers able to help clinical trials. And indeed, this is the flow of the next 5-year program. You will see that we have a working group for digital health that will be at the center of the activities of all the other work packages. So in conclusion, what I can say, the ERNs are really representing a revolution in health, because you see that we are spanning with all the most important interests, having the patient and the center, organizing in a proper governance all the different hospitals in Europe working together. Of course, we have still a lot of problems to solve, because we need to integrate our activity in the national health system. We have interoperability problems of data generated in our hospital. We still have a lot of bureaucracy in Europe to work with, and we need to sustain this kind of giants. And this is a major activity we're doing with the European Commission. But since all the coordinators are working together, we are very confident that with the new Commission and the new program, this program will be more successful than what has been already so far. And for this reason, I leave you my details, and you are welcome to contact me anytime with my mail or my phone to be part of this program. Thank you very much. Tim, I give you the the phone.
Thank you. Now we will move over to Dr. Mark Martinelli's presentation. But thank you, Dr. Scarpa. That was an incredible presentation. I'm looking forward to the Q&A session after all 4 of our presentations so we can discuss the importance of these networks, not just within Europe, but globally.
Looking forward.
Mark, please go ahead.
Yes, I'm waiting for the slides to
Thank you.
be live. So. Okay. No, sorry. Sorry about that. Yes, now I see that I control the slides. Hello, it's a pleasure to be here, and many thanks for the opportunity to present today, and also particularly to Jordi Cruz, that we've been knowing each other for a long time now. So I'm going to talk about what we do at Minorex. I don't think that the important is what we do exactly. That's not the most important part. I think that is the most relevant and for this audience, I guess, is how we do it, and with a particular emphasis on the process, on how we went from a molecule to a potential drug candidate, and which has been the involvement of the different stakeholders, particularly the patients. So at Minorex, we are focused on the orphan CNS space. That's where we are. And actually the indications where we work are neurometabolic disorders. The first one is neurometabolic disorder, ALD. And we work in different indications with the same molecule. It's a molecule that is called leriglitazone. It's a small molecule. It's an oral treatment that is taken once a day that has the potential to work in multiple indications. The reason for that is because there's a lot of biology, a lot of literature supporting the use of this approach in diseases affecting the CNS. Most of them orphan, but this is more broadly speaking CNS. But what has been lacking so far is one of these molecules with this approach reaching the CNS. When we talk about diseases where there's the CNS is involved, as in many of the mucopolysaccharidosis, we have 2 issues. We have the problem of having a molecule that is bioactive, but then we also need a molecule that reaches the CNS, and that's not an obvious thing to do, and that's really problematic as well. We have a molecule that can do that, can modulate the right target at the right place in the CNS, which allows us to exploit this mechanism. And we do it in different diseases. Our lead indication is ALD, or adrenoleukodystrophy, where we are conducting studies in the 2 forms of the disease. On one side, on AMN, or adrenomyeloneuropathy, which is the chronic and by far the most prevalent form of the disease. And I will explain a bit more the details of that. But then we are conducting a second study in the pediatric form of the disease, an acute one, so called cerebral ALD or CLD, which is this life-threatening form. As I said, this is an approach that has potential in different indications, not just ALD, also Friedreich's ataxia. This is also where we are expanding the indications of the molecule, as well other indications where we are working in earlier stage. And just to highlight that in ALD, particularly in this chronic form of the disease, AMN, we are the most advanced players. So with our little company from Barcelona, we are really leading the space in that indication. Okay, a few words about the ALD. I think that that's the interesting message here is that 10, 20 years ago, that this is an indication that was already known, of course, but it was not really well understood, particularly on which was the real impact and the real incidence of that indication. And one of the things that is changing the landscape is newborn screening. As for sure you know, the possibility to detect from the very beginning if a patient is affected by a particular disease, when these are genetic conditions, that can be a game changer for that patient, because then it can be followed properly and then treated as early as possible if there's a treatment in place. Fortunately, the newborn screening is in place, but not everywhere, in several US states, and starting to implement it in Europe, but that allows us to start understanding better the disease and diagnosing better the disease, identifying the patients earlier and earlier, not just because we detect patients when they are born, but because after that we detect the whole family, because these are genetic conditions. So that's really changing the landscape on the disease. And patients, similarly as in other indications, where we have different forms of the disease, different types, not all patients have the similar progression, etc. This is happening a bit of the same. As here, we have a form of the disease that is called AMN, which is chronic, and this form affects all patients, provided that they reach adulthood, because the onset for this form of the disease is in men, is in the 20s to 30s, whereas women that years ago were considered to be just carriers of the disease because this is an X-linked disorder. But today we know that women are also patients. So they are not just carriers, they are patients that will develop the disease later in life, in the 50s or 60s instead of the 20s. And these patients with AMN have a progressive degeneration in the spinal cord, leading to a motor dysfunction form. So problems with the gait, with the walking, with the balance, and ultimately requiring wheelchair, similarly as other conditions that you know. But then ALD patients can also develop cerebral ALD, which is different from AMN. In this case, is affecting the brain and is a very, very aggressive inflammation linked to death in 3 years' time in average. And this can happen in pediatric patients before they can show any sign of AMN, but adult AMN patients, 60% of them will also develop the acute form at one point in their life. So this is really important for those patients as well. The good news here is that there's a treatment for this form, for the acute one, is a hematopoietic stem cell transplant. Ex vivo gene therapy has been recently approved as well, but still requires myeloablation, so a pretty aggressive approach. This is not ideal in the sense that it's a very aggressive approach, but it stops CLD, but does not prevent the development of the chronic form of disease where there's nothing at all. So as a little company moving into this space with a molecule showing very nice data in preclinical models, we were moving into the clinic years ago, and we were facing the situation that many people working on the orphan space is facing. That when you try to move into the clinic, the knowledge is very limited. And that's a big, big problem. So whatever can be done to solve that situation is a key step to improve the development of treatments for these kind of indications in the orphan space. Because that's the major limiting step for development, in my opinion. The situation at that moment was that there was no real knowledge on which was the regulatory guidelines to be followed, the endpoints, etc., that will be acceptable for regulators, because there was no molecule approved on this kind of indication, nor a clear development path. The trial methodology was not clear, and there was no natural history data, which is, again, a major limiting factor. So for patients, a side comment, if you can support the development of natural history data, that's a very good investment, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to facilitate the development of different treatments down the road. What we did at that moment is, well, to follow a stepwise approach, to start a lot of work in the preclinical models to understand very well the molecule, how it works, the right dose, etc. Then to see what could we do in phase 1 clinical studies to see if we were really engaging the target, modulating the target in the brain of healthy volunteers in that case, and confirm that the doses in humans required to achieve that were safe. That's the primary goal of phase 1. And that was important because we had to move from there to a very big phase 2-3 study, very long study, as you will see, with quite a high number of patients, And it was important to really validate that the drug was working as expected before doing the large investment that it requires one of those studies. For running the study, it was also very important to understand better the disease, and even nothing was published. We got access to historical data, previous studies, and that was thanks to collaboration with all the players in the indication around the world. Also patient association, advocacy groups, that was also very important to really understand the disease and design the proper study. That was the study called Advance. It was a phase 2-3 study, so it's a registration study for this indication, AMN. It was double-blind, placebo-controlled, so with all the right standards for regulatory approval down the road. And we treated patients for 2 years. That is a very long treatment if you move from phase 1 to these kind of studies, because there's still a lot of uncertainty at that moment if the drug will really work or not. So really a big commitment from the patient side to really move into a study that requires long treatment with the possibility to receive placebo, et cetera, et cetera. Importantly, this was the largest trial ever in this condition. So again, for us, a little company such as Mri, it was a big achievement to complete this study with all these physicians that are really the reference sites in each country for this indication. In this study, we assessed if the drug was having an effect on the chronic form of the disease, but also trying to understand if it was preventing or reducing the incidence of the acute form of the disease in these adult patients. When looking at the endpoints, I'm not going to enter into all the results, but we saw that even if we were not able to see efficacy in the entire population on the primary endpoint, there were a group of patients that were clearly showing a strong benefit from the drug, showing an important impact on the primary endpoint that was the 6-minute walk test. At the same time, other endpoints, such as one called body sway, which is a measure of balance. So patients have a very big problem on keeping their balance in this population. And here we were able to see a very clear signal in the entire population. And this is this figure that you have here, showing in gray placebo going up on this measure. That means loss of balance over time, while the active, the blue line or the blue bar goes down, which means improvement on the balance component over time. This was also in line with clinical scales. This is important in these studies to really try to get an holistic view on disease progression, look at the disease from the many different angles, because again, this is not a well understood disease, or worse, not well understood disease 4 or 5 years ago. So we really had to look at it from multiple angles. And the picture is pretty consistent across the different angles that based on what we obtain. So we have consistent or strong trends or strong signals in the EDSS, SPROM, global impressions, quality of life. So very encouraging results in them. But importantly, as I said, we also look if these patients were developing the acute form of disease, yes or no, which is life-threatening form of disease because patients have a survival of 3 years' time. And radiologically, we saw a very clear reduction of the progression of cerebral lesions. And that's what you have here in this figure. So very clear reduction in the blue bar in terms of incidence of cerebral progression. But if we take into account the clinical picture, not just radiological, so clinical as well, only placebo patients that clinically develop cerebral ALD during the study for none of the active patients. So we are very encouraged about that result as well. Additionally, the drug was well tolerated, which is another very important part of the clinical trials to see if the drug is safe enough. So we are now in discussions with FDA, EMA, to see if those results could be sufficient for moving into an approval path based on this studies. Very briefly, we are conducting a second study in this condition in Nexus. It's an open label study in this case with pediatric patients below 12 years, between 2 and 12 years, all patients, with the goal to see if we can avoid or delay the need of a transplant-based process. This study is ongoing across Europe, but the principal investigator is Patricia Mussolino from Boston. So there's an important involvement from the Mass General as well. And finally, we also conducted another study in a different indication, in the case Friedreich's ataxia. I'm not going to enter into the details of Friedreich's ataxia, but again, it's also a neurodegenerative condition. We conducted a proof of concept study, in this case, a smaller study across Europe again, where we treated patients for 1 year in a double-blind placebo-controlled study. And in those studies, we were able to see also efficacy in disease biomarkers of ataxia, as well functionality in terms of upper limb ataxia. The figure that you have here, again, gray is placebo, is showing iron accumulation, which is a characteristic of those patients. The iron accumulates in the brain of these patients, and we see a clear reduction of that in the active arm, which is a clear sign of the drug working as expected in this patient population. So we are now preparing for a phase 3 in that. With that, I finished my slides, but just to finalize with thanking all the people that's involved. So developing a drug is not something that someone can do alone. It's really a team effort, and it's not even the company alone. It really needs a lot of effort and a lot of help around. So as you can see in the slide, there's many top organizations are working with us, with many very good researchers around the world. But not just researchers, it's also patient advocates, the clinical side that I've been showing my slides, and of course, our team that is very dedicated to this condition. And finally, and last but not least, we can move to the next slide. Yes, here, the people financially supporting the company. So we need a lot of investment to really progress with the drug development. So we need to thank it to our investors on the top of the slide, but also all the organizations in Spain, Catalonia, Belgium, Europe that have been supporting the company since the beginning. And with that, I finish. Many thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Martinel. Mark, that was an incredible presentation. We're in exciting times in terms of global research, especially with regard to the central nervous system and neurocognitive issues within the lysosomal storage disease disorders and MPS disorders. So thank you kindly for your incredible work. I'm pleased to now introduce Dr. Maria Escolar's presentation on long-term outcomes of MPS II patients after hematopoietic stem cell transplantation. And I think we're ready to move on with that.
Hi, my name is Dr. Maria Escolar. I'm a professor of pediatrics and neurodevelopment at the University of Pittsburgh, and I will talk to you about long-term outcomes of MPS II patients after hematopoietic stem cell transplantation. This would include both umbilical cord blood transplantation and bone marrow transplantation. So just a little bit of background, Hunter syndrome is an X-linked lysosomal storage disorder caused by the deficiency of iduronate 2-sulfatase enzyme with accumulation of GUGs in various tissues. Some of the clinical manifestations are short stature, hepatosplenomegaly, macrocephaly, hearing loss, dysautosis multiplex, joint contractures, cardiac disease, airway obstruction, and cognitive involvement, which could be severe. There are two forms. The one I just mentioned is the neuronopathic form. They really have a short life, although it has been improved by what's the standard of care, which is enzyme replacement therapy. They often survive to adulthood these days, but in the past, they would only survive until the first or second decade of life. So again, I'm going to focus on the severe form where you would have severe developmental delay. It starts anywhere at about 18 to 24 months, and it plateaus between 4 and 5 years, and then there's this rapid neurologic deterioration. Here, I can show you two figures from something we published in the past, but what you can see in the gray area, which is the area of normal development, is that patients with the mild form remain in that area, while patients that have the severe form very quickly plateau and drop to very, very low areas. You're looking at the calendar age plotted against the developmental age. So by the time they are 10 years, they have the function of a 6 to 9 months of age. This happens in all areas of development. I'm showing you here cognitive and fine motor. The gross motor area is actually the weakest, and the language skills get affected according to how severe the hearing loss is. So again, enzyme replacement therapy is the standard of care. It reduces the somatic burden, and unfortunately it doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. While with hematopoietic stem cell transplantation, the white cells will carry the enzyme, and the enzyme can be secreted and it can cross the blood-brain barrier. Our hypothesis was that if we can do it early, then we could preserve some neurocognitive function. But however, there's very limited data and there's variability in the reports because there's no standardized testing and no prospectively designed studies. I'll tell you a little bit about what other groups have published. So Kubacki et al. Had a publication showing that GAG levels were significantly lower for patients that are treated with hematopoietic stem cell transplantation. And this is much lower than compared to ERT. However, they are still higher when compared to controls. In figure A, B, and C, if you focus in the kind of big box, you can see the comparison between ERT severe and ERT plus HSCT for dermatan sulfate, heparin sulfate, and then you can see the last one, which is the heparin sulfate OS. So in the next slide here, I'm showing you again from the paper from Kubacki some of the findings in MRI lesions. So if you look at location, white matter changes, ventricular enlargement, and brain atrophy for the severe form, in box, you can see the black box and the blue box. The black one is ERT, the blue one is hematopoietic stem cell transplantation. You can see that with ERT treated patients, they worsened, they didn't improve, while with transplantation, they were stable and improved. And then when you look at the overall somatic disease burden, like macroglossia, frequent airway infections, hepatosplenomegaly, joint contractures, and sleep apnea, these are much better with transplant. There's also, well, in the mild phenotype, you can even see some improvements in other areas as described below, hepatosplenomegaly, heart valve disease, carpal tunnel hernia, the coarse skin, and frequent airway infections. So the objective of our study was really to evaluate the long-term outcomes of MPS II, increase the knowledge between the relationship of HAT treatment and developmental outcomes, and guide the management of affected patients. We recruited a total of 11 patients between 2002 and 2019. 6 patients had the transplant when they were less than 19 months, and 5 when they were more than 19 months. And we looked at 4 areas of development: cognitive, language, adaptive, functioning, growth, and fine motor skills. We did baseline evaluations before transplant, and then 3, 6, and 12 months after transplant, as well as yearly evaluations thereafter. Everything was done with standardized measures. It was prospectively designed, and we also had hearing assessments to understand the influence of hearing in development. The variability that was observed in outcomes really had to do with the age at transplant. So cognition and all areas of development improved. There was resolution of the somatic disease, especially the hepatosplenomegaly after transplant. And this even happened in patients that were severely affected, so the older patients. The cardiac valve disease and the upper respiratory obstruction did not appear to be better than those treated on ERT. The majority of these patients, by the way, were ERT naive. However, there were some that were already on ERT, and then it was stopped when the transplant started, and they were not used anymore after that. So behaviorally, their behavior improved. As you know, in hunters, you have hyperactivity, and you have all these challenging behaviors described as aggressive, perseverative chewing, and sleep disturbances. Some are were less common, such as staring and seizure activity. And the severity was really linked to the level of cognitive function. Patients treated before 19 months were significantly better in all developmental domains and all of these behaviors when compared to patients who were treated later in life. This study had 2 groups of patients because we initially were treating them with myeloablative conditioning, which is a much higher much higher toxicity, more complications, more GVHD. So in this group, the mortality was as high as 49%, while in all metabolic patients in that same period, it was about 35%, while after 2011, we had 100% survival for hunters. And in all metabolic patients, the survival would be 95%, so a mortality of 5%. So this has to be taken into account, that really transplant these days is a lot safer than it was in the past. And the younger you are, the safer it is also to transplant. So our conclusion is that early treatment with transplant improves long-term neurologic outcomes of patients with the severe phenotype. If you're less than 19 months, you can perform significantly better in all developmental domains. If you're more than 19 months of age, and then you will have a trajectory similar to untreated controls. There's a crucial therapeutic window between birth and the onset of CNS involvement. Ideally, you want to treat them before. However, it is complicated because how do you distinguish between the non-neuronopathic and neuronopathic, and also be early? So we need biomarkers and predictors of neurologic disease. Implementation of newborn screening is needed to facilitate timely diagnosis and treatment. And I believe that this is going to be necessary regardless of the therapy. So currently in clinical trials, we have gene therapy and we have several ERT medications that are able to cross the blood-brain barrier. Understanding how to counsel these families is going to become very important, because as patients get older, the effects of the therapy are going to be less evident. So one concern that I have is the ability to show really improved outcomes in these clinical trials when patients have been treated after they have been too much brain damage. The earlier these patients get treated, the better it would be. And comparing all these treatments will become challenging, because some of these trials are being done in patients that are more affected, while there are others where patients are less affected. So all these are important to take into account. Thank you very much for your attention, and thank you to the committee for inviting me to give this presentation.
Thank you very much, Dr. Escolar, for your presentation. We'll move right into Michaela Weigel's presentation, but I would also like to remind you to please upload your questions into the chat box. We're running low on time, so hopefully we can address everyone's questions at the end. And Michaela, lovely to see you. Please go ahead with your presentation.
Hello from Austria to everybody, and thank you in Spain for inviting me to have a little talk this afternoon. If less than 5 people out of 10,000 are affected, we speak about a rare disease. There are more than 8,000 different ones, and the MPS disorders are only a small part of them. They are rare and therefore almost unknown. Therefore, they are uninspiring, unattractive, and uninteresting for most of the world, but not for us, not for those affected, neither for our children, nor for us parents, nor for us in the MPS societies caring for them. As a mother and as a president of a small but very active and dedicated MPS society, I know that there's actually no such thing as an MPS child. There are only MPS families. The disease becomes a part of all of us and affects all of our life. It is obvious, unmistakable, and it enters our life with a transforming violence that is terrifying. Therefore, we cannot be quiet. We must be loud. We must use our voice, and we must give it weight so that we are heard, taken seriously, and respected with all our needs. When I say we, I mean us as parents, as patients, as a family, but also us as those responsible in the MPS society, as part of strategic partnerships such as MPS Europe or MPS International, or such as umbrella organizations that oversee the entire field of rare diseases, like Pro Rare Austria or Eurodis. I used to say in relation to Austria, of course, that 100 affected children are relatively few, but they are too many to be ignored, written off, and forgotten. That's why I try to use my voice to improve this tiresome situation for our patients in Austria and beyond, as a mother, as head of MPS Austria, and as a member of various strategic partnerships. Becoming an MPS mom is probably a huge shock for most of us, and is not something we voluntarily would wish for, because it will sometimes lead us to our physical and psychological limits. But being an MPS mom also means loving a child unconditionally and getting at least as much love back from it. It also means that we have to reformulate our life plans. Put your own life in the background. Prepare for the unexpected, difficult, and challenging situations coming, and being ready for surprises almost in every day, and definitely becoming the lioness who fights for her child. We know our children, and we know exactly when something is wrong. Even if we don't know what it is, we feel it. So we should not allow ourselves to be branded as hysterical mothers and hypochondriacs, and perhaps even sent to the psychiatrist, but we should insist that examinations are carried out until there is a result. There's nothing worse than the uncertainty. Even the worst diagnosis, and I'm afraid MPS is one of them, is better than none. We then know our enemy and can stand up to him as best as we can. We need to try to get the best possible treatment for our children. We are specialists for our children, and as we live with them 24/7, it is us who become specialists for our children's diseases. That is why we need to make sure that also the doctors listen to us. They can too learn from our experience. Be aware that most physicians will not see any MPS patient in their whole career. So it is difficult to find someone who is already familiar with the disease. All the more important it is to find the one who is willing to deal with the disease, no matter how far away he is or she. We need to strive for good therapies and good therapists, even if we need to educate them ourselves, as we sometimes do. We need to strive for appropriate aids and medications, maybe for annual rehabilitation stays for our children, even if we have to fight for them. And sometimes we have to. When operations are due, we should look for surgeons who are already experienced in the field, and don't just let someone try it. We did surgeries in Austria, of course, for my daughter, but we also did surgeries in England or in Germany because the specialists were there. Everyday life, school is not easy. Our children fall out of line. They need attention, help, resources, more time, and above all, they need understanding from the teachers, but also from their classmates. Do not let the disease or the disabilities choose the school, but the abilities your children have. This way we can give them the chance to be supported and educated in the best possible way. This is of utmost importance for the self-image in later life. In the past 25 years, which I now almost oversee, the MPS world has changed dramatically. And we have, even as a small MPS society, experienced many highlights. I would like to tell you a few that concern us also as an international community. Many years ago, we in Austria, together with Dr. John Hopwood from Australia, tried to find someone to produce the enzyme for MPS 6. Originally, we tried to do it in the framework of a university in Vienna. This didn't work out, but then we found biomarine. And in year 2000, Christoph, one of our Austrian MPS children, became one of 6 study patients in the phase 1 trial for Naglazyme in Oakland. What a happy day that was. A small country like Austria, a small MPS society like ours, is sometimes like a white spot on a map. Few affected patients only, few specialists, hardly any scientists dealing with MPS, no study hospitals in the field. Nevertheless, it is important to speak out in order to get the necessary attention. to give patients also from smaller countries a voice, which could mean maybe, perhaps, for example, the chance to participate in a study. I am happy to state that we were able to involve also some other patients later in the Vimicin study. In 2005, I had a momentous meeting with our then Chancellor, Dr. Wolfgang Schüssel, together with my daughter Maria. He promised to help me, and he did. He enabled us to organize a conference in Brussels to illustrate the difficulties of rare diseases in general, using MPS as an example. We were allowed to invite 30 physicians and scientists, and I had invited my friend and colleague Christine Levery, presented our MPS organizations. As a result, the rare diseases were anchored in the 7th framework program of the European Union, which allowed the submission of research projects for rare diseases from then on. Rare diseases are diverse and very different. Nevertheless, they have a lot in common. We have the same problems in many ways: lack of expertise, late diagnosis, no treatment options, no psychosocial support, difficult transitions. But together, we can get these problems under control more easily and, in the best case, reduce them. It makes sense to pull together on a political level, to speak with a common voice for all, and to make the rare diseases more audible, more visible, and more noticeable. As Pro-Rare Austria, for example, we do not speak for 20, 50, or 100 patients like we do sometimes in MPS societies, but even in Austria for 400,000 people. I'm a founding member of this umbrella organization in Austria. We see us as a platform to highlight the challenges faced by people with rare diseases, to address them professionally, and to bring about long-term improvements for a good life in the middle of society. Even if we think big in terms of school nurses, community nurses, newborn screening, treatment, psychosocial support, or more, we need to be modest. But constant dripping wears away the stone, and will sooner or later bring success. I don't have to talk much about MPS Europe and MPS International. In this context, I may presume that these two organizations are very well known here, and the time I have been allocated for my talk is almost used up. I was present there from the beginning, and I was allowed to follow and to support a great development. We collaborate with the medical community, we serve in patient advocacy boards, we plan symposiums like this one you are attending now, and a lot more. Our mission is to enhance the quality of life of persons affected with MPS. We want them to be recognized in their healthcare and social systems. We want them to have access to early diagnosis, clinical management, interventions, and treatment everywhere in every single country. So our overall goal is to improve care and quality of life for MPS patients on a global level. It was, and it is, often difficult to reconcile our desire, what we want to do, and our work, what we are able to do in these supra-regional organizations because of our manifold workload in the national MPS societies. So I think I can speak for all of us here when I say that help is more than welcome. So much has happened already, but there is still more than enough to be done, and we need dedicated people in every single country. Coming to an end, I would like to mention something that plays a significant role in my personal life. It is not always easy, maybe never, to live with MPS and at the same time be on the front line as a president with the whole family, responsible always and for everything, to meet the most varied needs, to accompany, to let someone go, to advise, to inform myself to be able to do that, and whatever else is involved. What helps me is prayer. not as a last resort, but in the first place. Prayer for perseverance, staying power, courage, strength, energy, wisdom in decisions, and so many more. With God, who is always here for me, I have managed almost 25 years now. I do not want to know how it would have been without him. Last but not least, I want to say a big thank you for my family, for all the support they gave me, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Michaela. And that was a very powerful and inspirational presentation, and emphasizing the need of strategic partnerships and collaboration. It can't be emphasized strongly enough. I'm not quite sure how much time we have, as it is 7:30. But we do have two questions for Dr. Maria Escolar, and unfortunately, she is unable to attend our question and answer session. But I would, hopefully in the time that we have, like to open up the discussion between our three panelists at the moment about what's changing in the atmosphere of partnerships and collaboration globally, and the need for the participation of patients and families in these collaborative efforts, and how this applies also to things such as clinical trials. So if I could pose that up for discussion between the three of you, please go ahead. Maybe Dr. Scarpa, you could talk about what's changing in the role of the European network. How were these strategic partnerships established, and how would you advise countries such as Canada, who's looking at a national rare disease strategy, to move forward to ensure that we are on the right track in putting our systems together, that every important and relevant partner and stakeholder is involved?
Well, thank you very much. I think that the answer is that networks are always open. Networks are important and are relevant if they are not closed club, but they are open. So, for example, the MetaBRN is a European program, but it's not limited to Europe. So, I mean, without reinventing the wheel, we are here to be part of activities also in other countries. And for this reason, I mean, everybody is welcome to join our work, to give expertise, to give opinions and suggestions to do even better. The only limitation is about potentially, if there is a grant from the European Commission and the country is not eligible for funding, but there is no limitation in science from patients or hospital around the world not participating in our network. Even the CPMS, the platform that we have to share our data, is open, meaning that even outside Europe, we can have guests according to the fact that the GDPR compliance is maintained in that country. So we can have guests and we can be collaborating with that. So regarding your question in Canada, of course, I mean, the participation to our ERN, as I said, is open. If you want to organize something, I think that the European Reference Network is a good example. It's a sort of activity that, in my opinion, should be replicated in all the other continents, because it's the union that makes a difficult decision possible in terms of finding quickly clinical trial patients, in terms of finding research tools for biomarkers in clinical trial. I mean, we can really help, and an organization like this can really cut corners and make quicker a lot of activities in development of a diagnosis and treatment.
Absolutely, thank you. Dr. Scarpa, I know with the International MPS Network, we have great vision to create a network globally that information is accessible, great vision to change the trajectory of how this disease is managed and research is advanced and families are supported. Dr. Martel, I wanted to ask you Martinel, a quick question about how a network such as the Meta-ERN would have supported the clinical trial efforts of your company.
Yes, I think that also linked with your previous question. So these are very important initiatives. So the big change for me compared with years ago in the rare disease space is that the knowledge was isolated or spread around the world. And thanks to different initiatives, including these reference networks, things are being put together, which has increased a lot the knowledge, because now progress goes much faster than before on one side. But second, in almost 99% of the drug developments in the orphan space, you really need to go international from the very beginning. So because there are not enough patients in a single country to start, so you really need to go abroad to work with the centers that really know the disease, that really know how to manage the patient, that really understand how a trial needs to be run in that particular group of patients. So these networks are key for that, and it's great that they are being put in place, and I think that that's one of the key changes in the landscape. The other is the involvement of patients, linked with your previous question. I think that this is central for the development, the involvement from the patients, and the improvements and communications that we are seeing in all areas of our life. I think that they are also impacting in the progress in the orphan space, because the involvement, the knowledge of the disease has increased a lot, the organization between communities has improved a lot, so which means that they are more powerful at the same time. The only word of caution that I would have there is that sometimes there's a bit of a clash in terms of timings or expectations. So even if there's much more network, even if there's much more knowledge, drug development is still a slow process, because there's a lot of uncertainty still. Long studies are needed, careful evaluations are needed to assess efficacy and safety. So which means that that always generates a bit of a frustration, I think, and I see that many times. And it's important to set up expectations on how long it may take for a certain development, and that's very important to the right dialogue with the patients that are the affected ones, of course, to make sure that the expectations are in the right place. So.
Thank you. And I think that's a role of patient advocacy groups across the globe, is to really help bridge those gaps. It looks like we've run out of time, so I want to just offer my sincere gratitude to all of the panelists today, but then especially to the organizers and coordinators of the International MPS Symposium for your hard work and dedication in the changing dynamic of the COVID world that we were faced with, and also to just extend a great conference to all, and thank you very much for attending this session. And I look forward to hopefully connecting in person in 2 years in Switzerland. Thank you all.
Thank you very much. Ciao, Michael.